Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Hipp, your host today, and I'm so excited to welcome you to another episode of Tea and Policy. Today, we're delving deep into policy issues that shape the lives of moms and children and families. And joining me for this insightful conversation is the incredible Julie Kashen. Now, Julie is a good friend, and aside from being just an incredible person and mom, Julie is a distinguished expert in women's economic justice and a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. Julie brings over 2 decades of experience advocating on the vital issues such as work and family, caregiving, economic mobility, and labor. Julie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
So let's get started off with a little bit of get to know you for the folks who are watching because you are amazing. Can you share a little bit about yourself, what has inspired your advocacy, and what has guided your career path?
I love the question. So let's go back to the mid 90s and, picture flannels and scrunchies and my Mac, what was it, an iMac computer sitting there, right, in my college dorm room. And I start to realize that I'd had this plan that I was going to one day be a super engaged mom and also have a really high impact career, and started to think about the fact that I had no idea how I could do both of those things, and wondered like what would actually make that possible, and why was that such a hard thing to envision as a possibility. So I was a poli-sci major. I was super idealistic, and I was like, oh, no big deal. I will just solve this before I and all my friends have kids through public policy. So 2 days after I graduated, I moved to Washington, D.C. with that as my plan. And I have been working on it ever since in various ways. My son is going to be 10 soon, and I've not solved it. But as you know, but I have been really honored to be a part of some progress along the way. And that has looked a lot of different ways. It's looked like being the labor policy advisor for the late Ted Kennedy on the Senate Help Committee, helping to introduce the first ever paid sick days legislation, the Healthy Families Act. So we, put out there that we believe that folks should be a guaranteed pay to take time to go to well visits or to care for a sick kid, to take a kid to the doctor. That is not law of the land yet. It's kind of insane. Like, that was in 2003 we first introduced that, and it's not the law yet. But many states have passed their own laws. Some localities have passed their own laws, and so we have made progress since then. And all of that progress was since that bill was introduced. I also had the chance to go work for the governor of New Jersey and help New Jersey become the second state in the nation to enact paid family and medical leave so that parents could take time with their newborns, and, adults could take time with their loved ones who were seriously ill or for their own serious illnesses. There are now, I think it's about 15 or 16 states that have that in place, but help to get New Jersey to be the second one. And then in recent years, I've been really focused on childcare policy and trying to move forward policies that would guarantee every family the childcare that their kids need and deserve.
I feel like that's such a good illustration, not only of like how amazing you are, but also how this policy work is such the long game, right? Like, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And, childcare change is 2 decades plus in the making. So much gratitude for your work and like creating those building blocks of change for us to be where we are today. So let's get into it a little bit about childcare. So I think as parents, we often feel the childcare crisis really viscerally, right? We know why it's important. We live it every day. And in our work, we know that childcare is essential, right? It's essential to every aspect of our collective lives, and it is critical in creating a more equitable society. The benefits are huge for gender and racial justice, the mental and physical health of caregivers, very particularly mothers, right? Hello, mental load, and the development and care of our youngest children, and the economy. But often there's this really yucky narrative, right? That if you can't figure out childcare for yourself, for your family, then that's your fault and your failure, right? It's just this really insidious effort to make us all feel isolated so that we don't see that this system that is really accountable to us is not serving us. But we know that this struggle, this childcare struggle, is a near universal experience for families, right? Like, doesn't matter where you are, where you come from, this is nearly universal. And it is, in fact, a failure of public policy, not a failure of us as moms or as caregivers. And childcare intersects with various aspects of our social life, right? Economic prosperity, workforce participation, education and equity, social welfare. Childcare is a public good. So, given your experience, how do we help people, particularly people who haven't experienced the crisis, may not have young kids anymore, may not have ever had children, understand that childcare is a public good? And then, what needs to change in our policy space to better reflect this idea, this reality that childcare is a public good?
Such a good question, such a meaty question. There's a lot of different ways to answer this. So one way to think about it is there's some folks who are never going to be with us on this. They don't buy it. They don't believe it. And nothing we say is going to change their mind. So we're going to put those folks to the side because we're not going to spend our energy on them. But then there's a whole bunch of folks who need some more help, right? They need help because we've been socialized to believe that it's an every family for ourselves society. We've been socialized to believe that bootstraps are a real thing that you can pull yourself up by, and that people have done that, even when we know that so many of the bootstrap stories actually have either inherited wealth as part of the background, or the GI Bill as part of the background, or relying on other ways of government support or collective support or community support that really come with being able to achieve things. And so I think we need to start thinking about this as you said, it's not an every family for themselves situation. It is more than that. So for me, I think about it like this. We should all care about babies in America, right? We should all want the best for babies because we're good people. Like, good people care about my baby, your baby, everyone's baby, and want them to thrive. I think that's the bottom line and a baseline that if we just could get to that point, imagine how much better America would be, right? But if you're not on board, right? If you're just like, no, I don't buy that. It happens that there's also amazing economic arguments to get you there, right? So number one, we want a thriving workforce. We want people who are able to be part of the economy, working jobs, being productive in the economy. Well, if we want everyone to be able to do that, that means we need childcare. That means we need to make sure that kids have safe, nurturing places to be while their parents are at work. And so that is economic argument number one. We also know that when you invest in children's healthy development, that their brains grow better, that we're able to support them as the civilians of today and tomorrow, and they're better able to, be our future workforce. And so again, I think babies are enough, but if you don't, then, the economy really benefits when we invest in childcare because it helps parents today and it helps kids tomorrow.
I think you laid that out so perfectly. Thinking about what are these economic benefits that we all can see ourselves in, and really being able to build out that public narrative. So I want to switch gears a little bit. So thinking back to the pandemic, if you will, with me for a minute, it really thrust the issues of care center stage. Like, not to say care issues were a mess before the pandemic. Like, every mom, every parent can tell you that. But the pandemic shone this light on what was happening in the childcare space, and how families were experiencing the crisis. And core to the response during that time was the expanded child tax credit, which we often call the CTC, and affordable childcare. And now we're hearing a lot about both of these policies, which is great. But we're also hearing that these are getting confused, right? And it couldn't be more important to understand the distinction between the child tax credit, CTC, and childcare, because they both play this really crucial, distinct, but yet complementary role in supporting children and families. So My question for you is, can you explain that distinction, right, between the child tax credit and childcare? And discuss why it's important for policymakers and the public to understand these differences. And secondarily, like, are these policies connected? Or does one solve the childcare crisis alone? Like, do we only need one of them?
We need both childcare policy and the CTC or child allowance or another policy like that. They are very complementary and not at all the same thing. I was trying to think about a good metaphor for it, and I haven't fully come up with it. But here was kind of where I was playing, which was imagine you're going on a family road trip and you need to make sure that you have gas in the car, that you have snacks for the kids, that you've got music ready to go, and that you know where you're going. And somebody's like, hey, we know gas is expensive. We're going to help you with that. Great. Then you start going and the roads aren't actually paved. So you can't actually drive anywhere, right? So your family road trip, you have the money for the gas, that's helpful, that's getting you started, but you actually don't have anywhere to go. That was kind of the way I was thinking about it, that when you have help with child allowance, right? That the idea is that it's helping you to pay for the expenses of raising a kid. And that includes the roof over your head. That includes the food you feed them. That includes school supplies. That includes diapers, right? That it is expensive to raise children. And these expenses, you don't like have a baby and suddenly get a raise, right? You don't. And actually, if you're a dad, there is a dad bonus. But if you're a mom, you actually get a penalty. You're actually less likely to make more money if you have a baby. And so you have a baby, you have all these new expenses, but no new money coming in. And so the child allowance or the CTC helps you to cover some of those costs. Also, you mentioned, during the pandemic, mental health was a huge issue for many families, and this can help with mental health costs for children as well. So there's so many different costs associated with a baby, a teenager, just raising children in general, and child allowance is aiming to help that. Then we have a childcare crisis. We have a situation where there is not enough childcare for every family who needs it. And often, if you can find childcare that works for your family, it's hard to afford because it's so expensive. So we already have this huge supply problem, this huge affordability problem, a huge staffing shortage problem where we don't have people who are willing to work for the poverty level wages that childcare pays right now because it doesn't have public investment the way it needs. And so what we actually need is to build a childcare system that will serve every family the way that they need it to serve their kid, right? So that will be culturally responsive, that will be really thoughtful about healthy child development and well-being, that will be safe and nurturing, that parents can then go engage in their communities in the way that they want to, knowing their kids are in good care. So that's kind of the dream and what we're working for. And actually, what the pandemic aid helped us see was possible because money went out to help during the pandemic to make sure that the sector didn't crash and didn't collapse entirely. It was already precarious, as you noted beforehand, but then it was really on the brink. And that money came in, went directly to providers, which is one of the first times we've done it that way, and really helped them to raise wages so that they weren't poverty level, to serve more families, to help it be more affordable for families, to kind of reduce tuition or fees or co-payments, sometimes even make it free. And so that really showed us that when you invest in a childcare system and think about it from a parent's perspective, an early educator's perspective, a child's perspective, a community perspective, that we could actually build something amazing and important. And both of those things were necessary at the same time. Families were facing poverty, families were facing huge economic crises, and needed to be able to keep food on their table for their kids, or needed to be able to keep the lights on and the bills paid. So we needed that kind of help. And we also need to build the childcare system so that every family can rely on the care that they need.
Yeah, thank you for really creating that distinction and how they work together. And I think, it really was that silver lining of the pandemic was our ability to be creative and to care for each other, right? And I think, hopefully that's not a lesson lost on us as we, move out of that time period. And this is our opportunity to really think about how do we build systems of care that hold us all together, right? So I want to take a minute and talk about parents and caregivers who are choosing or by circumstance are at home full time and caring for their children. This isn't to say that parents, whether they're in the full-time formal workforce, that it's not a full-time 24-hour job to be a parent. It obviously is. But let's just specifically think about parents who are staying at home to provide that full-time care. Our policies don't really reflect or value this really massive contribution that stay-at-home parents are making. And study after study is showing us the economic impact of parenthood in general, right? And that often falls to moms of who, is thinking about the caregiving, who's like coordinating the play dates and knowing the doctor's name and keeping the kids on their schedules, right? Like there's an economic impact to that. But there's also this massive economic impact for parents who are providing, the full-time day in and day out care of their children. Yet, as a country, we're not valuing it. We're undervaluing childcare responsibilities, which, is related to many things. So here's the thing. We don't value the parents and caregivers who are providing this labor. And at the same time, we aren't affording many families the ability to choose where and how and by whom their children are cared for, right? Because we don't have this idea that childcare is a public good and this idea that care is of value. So what is at the root of this undervaluing of childcare responsibilities? And how can policies better support parental choice in who and how their children are cared for, specifically as it relates to parents who are staying at home for the care of their children?
One of the things that you're getting at here is the way in which caregiving has long been such an undervalued labor. And you go back even, to the institution of chattel slavery that forced Black women to nurse and care for the children of their white landowners to the detriment of their own children, right? So it has long been seen as something that is lower in the social hierarchy. And that is a hierarchy that, if we're being honest, was designed to codify white supremacist patriarchy. So I'm going there, right? I mean, this is the system that our nation was built on in so many ways. And our work is so much about unraveling that and countering it and pulling down those building blocks so that we can rebuild this society built on the care that we saw during the pandemic. So, we're starting from that point where this is just not valued. And one of the things about it is, if you are not paying for care, right? So even after slavery was outlawed, you had the majority of Black and immigrant women in domestic work still caring for children for, maybe some low pay. You had actual laws like the Fair Labor Standards Act excluding them from getting minimum wage or benefits until they had to fight to get more of that. And so we have this kind of long history of it being built into our legal system, built into our culture, that caregiving is not a valuable activity. The consequence of that is that the people providing the care, whether it's Black and immigrant women, Latino women, whether it's moms of any color, right, that by not being able to amass earnings, wealth, property, any of that, they then can't participate as much in civic life and civic engagement, and are then not able to change the laws. So it's this kind of vicious cycle of institutionalized sexism and racism where, when we undervalue care, it means that we actually can't change the system. So part of the reason it's so important that we work to change that and to look at it differently is so that we can have more influence. So there's, so much work doing that Moms Rising does to really lift up these issues to make sure that moms can fully participate in the workforce, in caregiving, in civic life, in the ways that we want to, that are the steps that we need to keep taking. And so, when we think about building a childcare system or considering childcare a public good, that is about maximizing parental choices, right? That is about being able to say, if you want to, be going into a workplace and you want to be working on your career and focusing on that, that's great. Like, have your child in the care that works for your family. If you want to be furthering your education, if you want to be, basically that having those types of childcare options that are available to everyone makes it easier for everyone to have choices. And when we do that, we need to not minimize the choice of caregiving and not minimize the idea that caring for your child is one of the most important jobs that you can ever have. And, I think that our public policies are complicated in that way, and it's hard to think about. We also know that one of the consequences of undervaluing caregiving is that moms often do not have retirement security. That, we did a report at the Century Foundation that I think it showed about 50% of moms are not going to be stable in their retirement. And that's not okay. And so we need to find many ways to start valuing caregiving for, what the work actually is and what it gives to our society. And I think if we reimagine where we consider, what we consider to be valuable, that will make us a better society, right? If we put care front and center, that actually means we'll take better care of our environment too, right? And make sure that climate's taken care of. It'll make sure that we're caring for our neighbors and our communities more. And so I think having that kind of a shift in the way we think about just parenthood or, caregiving for older adults or any of those could actually really help to reshape society in incredibly valuable ways.
Oh, I love that so much. This idea of care being universal and so connected to all of our different systems. We just need more care, right? We need to value care. We need to institutionalize care in terms of like really having that present in so many of our public policies. So I'm curious, what's the plan right now? Like, what's possible in this, near short term that can really address the childcare crisis that families are experiencing? And what's the vision? Where do we want to be in 5, 10, 15 years? God, I don't want to think about that. But, like, where do we want to be in any given amount of time?
When our
What's
kids
the
are
dream?
thinking about these issues for themselves, in that future world. In the shortest term, Congress and the White House have called for $16 billion in emergency childcare funds to help stabilize the sector and make sure that childcares can continue to operate as they are around the country, and that we can continue to grow and have the stable supply of childcare that families need, so that they have options and that the options that we do have today don't go away. And then in the longer term, the vision is to have childcare be a guarantee for families, that they're able to find what they need in their communities that's going to work for them, that's going to meet the needs of their children, whether, a child has a disability and needs special attention in certain ways or special types of care or supports, whether a child, it comes from a Spanish speaking household and their family wants to keep them, speaking both Spanish and English, whatever the needs are, that families should be able to find what they need. And the people who are caring for our kids, the early educators who, nurture them and help them learn, they need to be paid well. We need to really value this profession the way that it should be and make sure that it can be a professional wage where there are benefits like health insurance and retirement security as well. So the vision that we're working toward has all of those factors built in and really envisions a public-private partnership where the government is a big funder of this kind of care, the same way that we have for K-12 education, and parents are partners in that work.
I love that. I feel like so many parents and families and providers have been a part of, building towards this idea and really using their lived experience to shape that. What do you think is the role of moms, of families in helping both the 16 billion in the short term and, our larger vision come to a reality? What can they do?
I think it's so important that we keep telling stories, that people understand that, first of all, that we see each other in each other, right? That it becomes clear that wow, I'm really struggling with childcare, but that's not just me. That's all of us, and we're all in the same situation. And something is wrong with that, and it's not us, right? That this is something that we should be able to rely on the government to be partners with us in, right? That this is a public good. This is a lot like education or libraries or parks, that something that we should be working on all together. So telling those stories helps us see each other and then see that it is this public problem that has a public solution, that it doesn't need to be so hard. I think also imagining and envisioning what's possible, really starting to articulate, well, what do I wish it looked like? What do I wish it felt like? Is it that, the childcare would be on my corner and I could go see my kid because I'm working from home and I could see my kid in the middle of the day? Is it that it's an after school program where they, pick up my kid and they by bus and then they bring them back to my house, right? Like what is this vision that we all share that we can imagine? Because I think until we can really imagine and articulate what that vision looks like, it's hard to fight for it. It is harder to fight for it when we're not willing to say, like, oh, it doesn't have to look like it does today. It could look really different, and start to paint that picture as well for ourselves and for policymakers.
I love that. It does not have to be this hard, and we can dream.
Yes.
Julie, thank you so much for joining us today on this really important conversation around childcare. I know we have a lot of work to do, but I'm really excited to be in this work with you and with so many moms and families across the country. It's giving me a lot of hope and inspiration for the work ahead. We've learned so much from you today, and thank you so much for being here and for the work that you do to advance childcare and gender justice and just a society that is more careful. So, Julie, any quick takeaways or final words that you want to add?
Thank you, Lauren. I love being in this work with you and Moms Rising and all of our other partners. I'm so grateful that we get to do this work every day. It's really a pleasure to work on it and imagine what could be possible when we do achieve what we're trying to achieve and once everyone has the type of care that they need. So, let's keep hoping and keep imagining, keep dreaming big. And I think, we can keep achieving.
Yes, go fight, win. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Tea and Policy. To join the fight with us and the movement, you can follow us on our socials at Moms Rising.